park was calm in the way only early autumn could manage, the kind of calm that felt deliberate, almost staged, as if the world itself had agreed to slow down for a few hours. Sunlight filtered through tall trees in soft gold ribbons, scattering across a wide walking path that curved gently around a quiet pond. Leaves crunched faintly underfoot, and somewhere in the distance, a child laughed, the sound light and free, like something that belonged to a different life. For Daniel Whitmore, that peaceful Sunday routine had become sacred. It was the one part of his week untouched by boardrooms, negotiations, or the relentless pressure of being a self-made millionaire before 40. Daniel walked steadily, his hands firmly on the handles of a wheelchair as he guided it along the path. Sitting inside it was 9-year-old Lily, his fiancée's daughter. She wore a neatly pressed pale blue dress, her hair braided carefully, every strand in place. To anyone watching, it looked like a picture of quiet devotion, a wealthy man taking time out of his powerful life to care for a fragile child. Daniel had learned quickly that appearances mattered, especially when money was involved. People trusted images more than truth. Lily sat silently, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed somewhere ahead. She rarely spoke unless spoken to, and when she did, her voice carried a softness that always unsettled Daniel. Children were supposed to be loud, messy, careless. Lily was none of those things. She carried herself like someone much older, like someone who had learned early that silence was safer. "You comfortable?" Daniel asked gently, glancing down at her as they passed a wooden bench overlooking the pond. "Yes, sir," she replied automatically, her voice barely louder than the wind brushing the leaves. Daniel hated that answer. He had told her countless times she didn't need to call him that. He wasn't her teacher or a doctor or a stranger. Soon, if everything went as planned, he would be her stepfather. Still, she never changed. It was as if politeness had become armor. He slowed the wheelchair slightly, trying to keep the moment light. "You can call me Daniel, you know that." She nodded but didn't answer. Daniel sighed inwardly. Catherine, his fiancée, always said Lily was shy because of the trauma. The accident, the long hospital visits, the therapy sessions, the doctors who spoke in careful voices and avoided promises. Daniel had believed every word. Why wouldn't he? Catherine was elegant, composed, and heartbreakingly convincing when she spoke about her daughter's suffering. And Daniel, for all his business instincts, had wanted to believe her. As they approached a bend in the path near the pond, a small figure stepped forward and stopped directly in front of them. Daniel slowed to a halt. The boy looked about 10 or 11, thin, with worn sneakers and a faded shirt that had clearly seen too many summers. His dark eyes were sharp, alert, the kind of eyes that had learned to observe rather than expect kindness. He stood his ground without fear, staring not at Daniel but at Lily. "Excuse me," Daniel said politely, shifting the wheelchair slightly to pass around him. The boy didn't move. Instead, he raised his arm and pointed straight at Lily. "She can walk," the boy said. The words landed with weight, heavy, sudden, impossible to ignore. Daniel froze. "I'm sorry," he asked, his voice tightening despite his effort to stay calm. "She can walk," the boy repeated louder now, his finger still extended. "Your fiancé won't let her." The air seemed to drain from the park. Daniel felt a strange sensation rush through his chest, like a sudden drop on a roller coaster. He looked down at Lily instinctively. Her face had gone pale. Her hands were no longer folded neatly. They were gripping the sides of the wheelchair so tightly her knuckles had turned white. "Son," Daniel said carefully, stepping in front of the chair, "that's a very serious thing to say." The boy lowered his hand, but his gaze never wavered. "I know." Daniel swallowed. "Lily has been in a wheelchair since before I met her. She was in an accident." "No accident," the boy replied immediately. "I've seen her." Daniel felt his pulse quicken. "Seen her doing what?" "Walking," the boy said simply. "Running, laughing." The world felt suddenly unsteady. Daniel crouched down, bringing himself level with the boy's eyes. "Where?" "Here," the boy said, gesturing around them. "By the pond, when your fiancée isn't around." Daniel's thoughts raced. Medical reports, specialist evaluations, physical therapy schedules. Catherine's tears when she talked about Lily's condition. It didn't make sense, and yet something deep in his chest tightened with recognition. A feeling he couldn't explain but couldn't dismiss either. He turned slowly toward Lily. "Lily," he said softly, placing a hand over hers. "Sweetheart, is this true?" Her lips trembled. Tears filled her eyes almost instantly, spilling over before she could stop them. I'm not supposed to say," she whispered. Mama said something bad would happen." Daniel felt his heart crack. "What kind of bad thing?" he asked gently. She shook her head, crying now. "She said we need the money. She said Daddy would want us taken care of." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. In that moment, fragments he had ignored finally aligned: the disability payments, the insurance trust, the insistence on keeping Lily in special programs despite doctors suggesting reassessment. He had called it caution. Now it felt like something darker. The boy stepped closer. "My name's Adam," he said quietly. "I didn't want to say anything before, but today you looked like someone who might listen." Daniel looked at him, really looked at him, and saw courage far beyond his years. "You did the right thing," Daniel said firmly. He stood, pulling out his phone, though his hands were shaking now. But before he could dial, Lily's small voice stopped him. "If I stand up," she asked through tears, "will you still love my mama?" Daniel knelt beside her again, his voice breaking. "What happens next isn't your fault. None of it." He placed his hands gently on the wheelchair. "Lily, can you try?" The park seemed to hold its breath. She hesitated, then slowly placed her feet on the ground. And then, with trembling legs and a quiet sob, she stood. For several long seconds after Lily stood up, no one moved. The breeze rustled the leaves overhead, a duck skimmed across the pond's surface, and life in the park continued as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But for Daniel, the world had narrowed to a single point: the small girl standing in front of him, shaking, terrified, and very much on her own 2 feet. His chest felt tight, not with shock alone, but with guilt, the kind that settles in when you realize you've trusted the wrong story for far too long. Lily swayed slightly, and Daniel instinctively reached out, steadying her with gentle hands. She wasn't weak. She wasn't collapsing. She was simply afraid. Afraid of what would come next, afraid of betraying the one person she had been taught to protect at all costs. The wheelchair stood behind her like a silent witness, suddenly stripped of its meaning. "You're doing great," Daniel said softly, lowering himself so his eyes met hers. "You're safe. No one is angry with you." Her tears fell freely now. "Mama said if anyone found out, they'd take me away." The words hit him harder than anything else so far. Daniel glanced toward the boy, Adam, who stood a few steps back, watching with tense concern. This wasn't mischief. This wasn't imagination. This was a child living under fear, carefully trained to lie for survival. Daniel helped Lily sit down on the nearby bench instead of the wheelchair. The difference felt symbolic, almost ceremonial. He pulled his jacket off and draped it around her shoulders, grounding her in warmth and certainty. "How long?" he asked gently. "How long have you been able to walk?" Lily hesitated, then whispered, "Since before you met Mama." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. Months. All those carefully curated appointments, the stories of slow progress, the constant reminders that hope had to be managed. Catherine had been managing something else entirely. He stood and turned away, dialing his phone with steady resolve now. This time he wasn't reacting, he was acting. He spoke quietly but clearly, giving instructions, asking for immediate guidance. When he ended the call, his expression had changed. The kindness was still there, but it was now anchored to something stronger: clarity. Adam shifted nervously. "Am I in trouble?" Daniel looked at him sharply, then shook his head. You might have saved her, that's never trouble. Adam exhaled, relief flickering across his face. Daniel knelt again beside Lily. I'm going to make sure you're protected. That means asking some people questions, grown-up questions, but I need you to know something first. She looked up at him, eyes wide. You didn't do anything wrong, not once. Her shoulders sagged, as if she had been holding herself upright for years. The sound of footsteps approached from behind, brisk, familiar. Catherine's voice followed before she came into view. Daniel, why are you stopped? She called, irritation already creeping in. You know Lily shouldn't. Her words died when she saw the empty wheelchair, the girl sitting on the bench, and Daniel standing between them. What is going on? Catherine demanded, her smile brittle, eyes darting to Adam. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. She stood up, he said calmly. She walked. Catherine laughed once sharply. That's ridiculous. She can barely. She walked, he repeated, and she told me why she hasn't been. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Catherine's face shifted, not into grief or surprise, but calculation. Daniel saw it clearly now. And for the first time, he understood that this wasn't just about money. It was about control. Catherine's smile didn't disappear right away. It lingered, fixed and fragile, as if she believed she could still bend the moment back into something manageable. Daniel had seen that look before, not in family life, but across polished conference tables when deals began to unravel. It was the expression of someone calculating how much truth could be denied before consequences arrived. Daniel, she said lightly, stepping closer, her tone soothing, rehearsed. You're letting a child's imagination get to you. Lily has episodes, you know that. The doctors warned us. Daniel didn't argue. He simply stepped aside so Catherine could see Lily clearly, sitting upright on the bench, feet planted firmly on the ground, eyes lowered, body tense but undeniably stable. No tremors, no collapse, no confusion. Catherine's gaze flickered, just for a fraction of a second, and that was enough. Lily, she said sharply, dropping the softness, get back in your chair, right now. Lily flinched. Daniel felt something harden in his chest. He placed himself between them without raising his voice. Don't speak to her like that. Catherine stiffened. She's my daughter. And she's a child, Daniel replied. A child who's been afraid to tell the truth. Catherine's eyes shifted to Adam standing nearby. Who is that? A boy who noticed something the adults ignored, Daniel said, and had the courage to speak. Catherine scoffed. This is absurd. You're listening to strangers over your own fiancée. Daniel held her gaze. I'm listening to Lily. That was the moment Catherine lost control. You don't understand what it's like, she snapped. After her father died, everything fell on me. Therapy costs money. Care costs money. Stability costs money. Daniel's voice remained steady. So does lying. Lily began to cry again, small, silent tears that soaked into Daniel's jacket. He knelt beside her, shielding her from the rising tension. You promised, Lily whispered. You said it was to keep us safe. Catherine's face paled. Lily stopped talking. Daniel stood. No, she can talk now. People nearby had begun to notice. A couple walking their dog slowed. A woman pushing a stroller paused. Catherine looked around, realizing too late that the stage she had controlled for so long was no longer private. Daniel took out his phone again, not to threaten, but to document. I've already spoken to professionals, he said. They're asking questions today, and Lily will be examined by people who have no financial interest in keeping her in a chair. Catherine's composure finally cracked. You think this is easy, she hissed. Do you know what happens when the money stops? Daniel answered quietly. The truth starts. Adam stepped forward hesitantly. She used to race me, he said. By the pond, she laughed then. Catherine rounded on him. You should have stayed out of this. Daniel's voice cut through the air, calm but unyielding. Enough. For the first time, Catherine fell silent. Daniel turned to Lily, crouching again. You don't have to protect anyone anymore, he said. I will. Lily nodded, exhaustion washing over her face, not physical, but emotional, the release of a burden too heavy for her age. As the authorities arrived at the edge of the park, Daniel knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever came next, Lily would never be silenced again. The arrival of the officials did not explode the moment the way Catherine had always feared it would. There were no raised voices, no handcuffs, no spectacle. Instead, there was something far more unsettling for her: calm procedure. Two women approached first, their posture professional, their expressions neutral but attentive. They spoke softly to Lily, introducing themselves, kneeling to her level, asking if she felt comfortable talking. Lily hesitated, then glanced at Daniel. When he nodded, she took a breath and answered them. It was the first time anyone had asked her permission in a very long time. Catherine tried to reclaim the narrative. She spoke quickly, emotionally, describing years of sacrifice, exhaustion, and a child who didn't understand her own condition. But this time her words landed differently. The officials listened without interruption, writing things down, asking follow-up questions that Catherine hadn't anticipated. Dates, names, independent assessments. Each question peeled away another layer of certainty she once relied on. Daniel stayed close to Lily, his presence steady, grounding. He noticed how Lily's posture changed as the questions continued. Her shoulders, once permanently tense, began to loosen. She spoke haltingly at first, then more clearly, explaining how she had been told when to stand, when to sit, when to pretend her legs hurt. How the wheelchair became part of the rule book. How fear was used as instruction. When asked why she hadn't told anyone before, Lily's answer silenced everyone within earshot. Because I didn't want Mama to lose everything, she said. The truth landed heavy, not as accusation but as tragedy. Catherine's composure fractured. She's confused, she insisted, her voice shaking now. She doesn't know what she's saying. One of the officials looked up calmly. Children who are confused don't give consistent details over time. Catherine's breath caught. Adam stood nearby, hands clenched, watching as if afraid the truth might still slip away. Daniel motioned him closer. You did something very brave, he said quietly. No matter what happens next, remember that. Adam nodded, swallowing hard. The officials explained the next steps with measured clarity. Temporary separation, independent evaluations, financial reviews, protection protocols. Catherine heard only fragments, enough to understand that the control she had maintained was ending. Daniel spoke privately with one of the women, his voice low but firm. He offered cooperation, resources, legal transparency, not to buy influence but to ensure speed and safety. For once, his wealth wasn't leverage, it was support. When it was time to leave the park, Lily did not return to the wheelchair. One of the officials offered her hand, and Lily stood up on her own, legs trembling but strong. People watching from a distance didn't clap or cheer. They simply watched, aware they were witnessing something intimate and irreversible. Catherine watched too, tears streaming now, not of remorse but of realization. The story she had built had reached its final chapter. As they walked away, Lily looked back once, meeting Catherine's gaze. There was no anger there, only relief. Daniel stayed behind briefly, standing with Adam by the pond where everything had begun. The water reflected the sky, calm and unchanged. Most people would have looked away, Daniel said. You didn't. Adam shrugged. She looked sad. Daniel nodded. Sometimes that's all the truth needs. The building Lily was taken to that afternoon didn't look frightening at all. That surprised her. She had imagined cold walls, sharp voices, and rooms that smelled like medicine. Instead, there were wide windows, soft lighting, and people who spoke slowly as if every word mattered. Still, Lily's hands trembled as she sat on the edge of a cushioned chair, her feet touching the floor freely without permission, without fear. For the first time, no one told her when to sit or how to hold herself. Daniel stayed nearby but didn't crowd her. He understood now that protection didn't always mean standing in front. Sometimes it meant standing close enough to catch someone if they fell, while letting them learn they could stand on their own. When the doctor entered, she smiled at Lily first, not at Daniel, and that alone felt like a small miracle. They didn't rush. They asked Lily to walk, then run a little, then stop when she felt tired. They watched carefully, not with suspicion but curiosity. When Lily laughed, a real laugh, sudden and surprised, Daniel felt something shift inside him. It wasn't just relief. It was grief for the months that laughter had been stolen. The results were clear. Lily was healthy, strong. There had been no injury preventing her from walking for a very long time. The words didn't feel like victory. They felt like mourning. Later, in a quiet office, Daniel was given explanations he already suspected. The money, the dependence, the gradual erosion of truth disguised as care. The professional didn't speak cruelly about Catherine, but she didn't excuse her either. Intent, Daniel learned, did not erase harm. That evening, Lily stayed in a safe temporary home, a place filled with books and soft blankets and children who played loudly. Daniel visited, unsure of his place now. Lily ran to him when she saw him, actually ran, and hugged him so tightly he had to blink back tears. "You came back," she said. "I told you I would," he replied. She looked up at him seriously. "Am I bad for telling?" "No," Daniel said immediately. "You were brave." Across town, Catherine sat alone in an apartment that suddenly felt far too quiet. The phone calls she tried to make went unanswered. The certainty she once relied on was gone, replaced by questions she could no longer control. For the first time, the story wasn't about her. Daniel returned home that night to a silence of his own. The life he had planned had dissolved, but in its place was something heavier and truer. He realized that love without honesty was not love at all, it was possession. Before leaving, Lily had asked him one last question. "Will I still see Mama?" Daniel had answered carefully, "That will depend on what's safest for you." She nodded, accepting the answer without fear. That alone told him how much she had already grown. Weeks passed, and with them came a strange kind of calm, the kind that settles only after a storm has finished tearing everything apart. Lily's days slowly filled with ordinary things she had once watched from the sidelines. School hallways where she walked beside other children instead of being pushed ahead of them. Playgrounds where scraped knees were treated like badges of honor instead of emergencies. Even boredom, she learned, was a privilege. No one asked her to pretend anymore. Daniel remained present, though careful. He attended meetings, listened more than he spoke, and allowed professionals to do what they were trained to do. Power, he learned, was not forcing outcomes. It was refusing to interfere when the truth finally had space to work. Lily continued her evaluations, not because anyone doubted her strength, but because consistency mattered now. Trust had to be rebuilt, slowly and visibly. Catherine's world narrowed. Without access to the narrative she once controlled, explanations failed to land. Courts did not speak the language of emotion alone, they spoke in timelines, records, and patterns. Catherine was required to attend counseling, education programs, and supervised visits. There were moments she cried, moments she raged, moments she insisted she had done what she thought was right. But the system, unmoved by justification, focused on one thing only: the child. When Lily saw her mother again for the first time, the room was quiet and watched carefully. Lily walked in on her own, shoulders squared, no wheelchair in sight. Catherine looked up and for the first time saw her daughter not as a responsibility or a resource, but as a separate human being. Lily did not run forward. She did not hide. She simply stood. "I can walk," Lily said softly. Catherine covered her face. That moment did not fix everything, but it changed the direction of what could still be repaired. Adam's life changed too, though he never expected it to. Daniel quietly arranged tutoring, school support, and opportunities Adam had never imagined asking for. not as a reward but as recognition. Courage, Daniel believed, should never go unanswered. Adam remained humble, almost uncomfortable with attention, but something in his eyes had shifted, a belief that his voice mattered. Months later, on another autumn afternoon, Daniel returned to the same park. The pond looked the same. The trees still scattered light across the path. But this time, Lily ran ahead of him, laughing freely, her shoes kicking leaves into the air. Adam jogged beside her, challenging her to race. Daniel watched from a distance, hands in his pockets, heart steady. He understood now that justice was not about revenge or spectacle. It was about restoration, about removing fear and letting truth do what it was always meant to do, set people free. As Lily turned back toward him, smiling without hesitation, Daniel knew the story had ended exactly where it should have begun. With a child allowed to be won,